Hi, everyone, and welcome to Marketing Corner, episode 88. Whoop, whoop.
Yay!
And today we are honored to have a very special guest coming from lovely sunny Malaga. Corey Morris is here with us today. So, yeah, I'd love to maybe, Casper, can you talk to us a little bit about how we got Corey to commit to at least an hour with us?
Yeah, definitely. So I have a good friend called Dennis, and he's like a PR guy, and he said, "Dude, you got to talk to Corey." And I was like, "Okay, who's Corey?" and then I looked up Corey, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm in," because I looked at your CV, and then I also had a chat with you, Corey, before, and I was like, "Okay, you actually have a lot of really cool stories to tell." So I thought, like, "Hey, Jen, we should get Corey on." So that's at least my context for getting us here. We can thank Dennis for bringing you up. He's like the top of the funnel, let's call it that. But that's essentially how we ended up here, at least from my perspective. Is that also how you feel like you were introduced?
Dennis is that's awesome. Dennis is my biggest fan, I think. Although he'll probably never tell me that himself, though. So it's nice to hear it coming from you, Casper. Yeah, that's kind of how we ended up here. But I also think that says a lot about just my career path in general. It's never been linear. I've never been one of these people who just like said, okay, I want to be here in 5-10 years. Let's figure out a path to get there. I wish I was smart enough earlier when I was, doing my career planning, listening to my guidance counselor back in high school. Unfortunately, that was not the case, though.
Exactly, and that's how you ended up here. But let's still so you're the CMO of Spree, right?
Correct.
Just for those who are not aware, tell me, Spree, what is that?
Yeah, so Spree is a live shopping technology company, mostly known for its award-winning live shopping platform that enables businesses to create fully shoppable videos across Facebook, Instagram, and their website at the same time. If you're not familiar with live shopping, think of it as TV shopping 2.0, or as I like to tell people, TV shopping on steroids. The big difference now is that instead of like QVC, Home Shopping Network, which I grew up in the States, now you have brands and retailers doing it themselves, which is really cool because it's almost like the democratization of it. And then they're doing it specifically on their own Facebook and Instagram channels, which they've spent the last nearly 20 years building. So they have millions of followers, but they really struggle to engage them and drive that traffic to their website. So that's kind of the live shopping in a nutshell. We can dig into that a little bit more, but it's incredibly exciting. And I also think it says a lot about where I am in my career is that I always find myself at like the forefront of the latest thing within the market, or actually having to create a new market. I haven't really planned that, but that's just kind of been indicative of my last 10, 15, 20-year career.
And that's for me, that's so interesting because like I sometimes stumble upon people who just manages to also stumble upon that.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I haven't done the same in terms of tech. Like I've never been at the forefront of tech. I've been extremely lucky to just hit like upcoming unicorns in Copenhagen. I was like a part of Trustpilot, and I just fucking needed a job, right? It's like nothing to do. Honestly, all respect, but I just need a job, and I happened to stumble upon one of like the fastest growing unicorns in Denmark. Right. And then after that, I was like, okay, what's that? Then I ended up in Templify, and then grew up from 30 to 300, and then United FinTech. So it's like kind of like, I don't know how, but that was at least not a tech front. But you're saying you've been lucky to be on the tech front of things.
I have,
to some extent.
Yeah. And again, I wish I would have planned for it, but I didn't. I was just really lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And I think this is key. Also know the right people. I think, at the end of the day, it's really about your network and your network working for you. Man, that whole story starts back to just how I even ended up in Denmark. Also just meeting the right person at the right time, which happens to be my wife now, almost married 25 years. I didn't see that happening. I'm just a poor boy from Mississippi who just happened to find himself in Crete, Greece in 2000. And like, what the hell am I doing here? And then I meet a girl from Denmark, and I'm like, okay, where's Denmark? We didn't have Scandinavia in our geography classes back in Mississippi. So
every time I go back to America, they think I'm in Holland.
Oh,
they think, we love your tulips, and I'm like, no, that's not Denmark.
Well, I think a lot of Americans just consider Europe as just one big place, but it goes the other way as well. Because I think a lot of Europeans consider the United States just one big place, and I'm like, I guess you guys have never been to Mississippi yet. It's not the same as New York.
I've never been to Mississippi.
Mississippi's a lovely place. I just went back there.
Okay.
But no, I mean, Casper, to your point, yeah. So, I mean, the way I ended up, for example, to quick rewind, I'm currently at Spree, been there for almost 2 years, and that's absolutely wonderful company to work for. Before that, I was with a company called Synergy XR. It was previously known as Unity Studios, a spinoff of Unity Technologies, which some of you people may know about that. With them for a few years and helped bring them through a big rebrand phase and help us actually.
That's the VR technology, right?
That is XR, yeah. So if you think live shopping is difficult to explain to people, imagine explaining what all these acronyms like XR, AR, VR.
Yeah, gotcha.
I went through a crash course in market education, and that was probably one of the most difficult companies that I worked for in terms of helping them understand the technology, because not a lot of people have had this on their face, the VR glasses. But once they got into that, they were like, okay, that's pretty awesome. And then before that, I was with Airbnb, you mentioned. We can get into that a little bit. And my runway into joining Airbnb was with a company called Guest, and that's GAEST.com, which is basically Danish for guest, just spelled in a really different way, which allowed us to grab that domain without having to pay a few $million. Yeah. But the way I ended up with Guest was actually pretty crazy, because it was through people who I had known through the alumni network that I helped establish back at my alma mater when I graduated in 2006. So when I graduated, I had to go through the whole education thing here in Denmark. I wanted to become official in Denmark. When you come to a new country, you want to learn the language, but I also realized that my military background, where I worked in meteorology and oceanography, probably wasn't going to help me career-wise in Denmark, because I was noticing that most meteorologists and oceanographers were really good at Danish, and I'm like, I'm not going to be that good. So I went back through the education route and kind of started from scratch and did a degree in marketing. And as I was graduating, because I had built a really good network while I was a student, I was known as that American guy who's doing all kind of stuff. I was invited in to come and help establish their alumni relations department, which was unheard of in Denmark. Actually, really not that big in Europe at the time. This was back in 2005, 2006. Spent 11 years with them, helping establish that as one of the biggest alumni networks in Northern Europe. And that was really, really cool. But it was through that network. 2 guys reached out to me and said, hey, we've got this company. You're on our radar. We know you. We like you. Do you want to come and join us? And I was like, startup? I'm really sure.
So that was your first startup venture?
Kind of, because I've always been so the alumni department was kind of I guess you can call that entrepreneurship, because it was within the university confines and they had never really done that. We felt like a startup within the larger university. And then we had some spinoff as well. We developed the Career Center and a bunch of really cool stuff. So we had a startup mindset, but just in a different framework, obviously, and also in a public sector as well. So it didn't have the whole commercial mindset like I have now, where it's like, you've got investors, you have to perform, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I felt that I've been a part of the whole startup vibe for some time, but it wasn't in earnest until around 2017 that I stepped out of the higher education sector and then joined my first legit startup. And then, boy, that was an eye opener.
Yeah, because I was about to say, was that when you were at Aarhus University there? Was that more was that marketing too much, or was it a little bit more wide entrepreneurship?
It was. Yeah. So we were a small team of 2 to start the alumni relations department. It ended up it was incubated within the communications and external relations department. Mind you, I went through 5 major organizational changes when I was at the university during those 11 years. So we went from being an independent business school to, and this happened across the entire country in Denmark, where a lot of these individual business schools and universities merged and aligned and had these acquisitions. So we ended up, and I think today we are, definitely a full part of Aarhus University. But so yeah, that's kind of how that started. And then my role ended up becoming the chief evangelist. So I was effectively the marketing department. I mean, we didn't have the roles like CMO and stuff, but we did everything. I mean, we did everything, and we ended up becoming a team of 6 or 7 people in the end. And then that actually grew to where each faculty at the university had their own little alumni department. So it was cool to take it from a team of 2 to, I think now it's in excess of 20 people.
Amazing.
That's super interesting, because I actually also have I got into Europe through working through universities as well. I found that it kind of, as an American, I studied abroad, wanted to stay. I fell in love as well. So I was like, I gotta stay. How do I stay? And the only value I could kind of bring to the economy in the eyes of the UK was, oh, you're American, you can work with Americans living in the UK. And then kind of through that establish myself, and then managed to kind of work my way through Europe, and now here I am 20 years later.
But
so
that's our unfair competitive advantage in a way, right? Because you're like, oh, you're American, there's all these great qualities associated with you, whether you have them or not.
A lot of not so great qualities also.
Yeah, I don't know. And then you're like, oh, you're really good at speaking English, and I guess you're American, so you must be extroverted. I'm like, well, I happen to be,
outgoing,
but not
it's all the stereotypes.
You're sporty.
And I was like, you know what? If that's what you're thinking, I will definitely, I'll be opportunistic here. Yes, I will, use that to my advantage.
You should.
Yeah, you should, right? Yeah, you should.
I'm super curious, because I want to hear, like, so, because like you were at Guest, and I also know Guest is let's call it a success story, right? Like most Danish people know Guest, I at least did. But tell me, I want to hear about, like, how did you getting acquired by someone like Airbnb? I think that's pretty high on a wish list for things to experience from anyone. Like,
yeah, it was. And we actually joked about it in the beginning. So I said, you know what? I was like, wouldn't it be cool if, because we used to tell people in the beginning that, so those of you who don't know what Guest is, Guest was basically a creative marketplace for meeting rooms, for creative meeting spaces. Not a creative marketplace. It was a marketplace for creative meeting spaces. So we used to tell ourselves, we're basically the Airbnb for creative meeting spaces. We were like, wouldn't it be funny? Wouldn't it be funny, guys, if we got acquired by Airbnb? And then sure enough, a year and a half after I joined, that happened. And that was a wild journey. It was an exciting journey before then as well, because you understand the rise and fall and all the challenges that you face with trying to take this little small startup and make it a success. And then obviously once the acquisition took place, that was also an incredibly exciting journey. Yeah.
How is it? I'm curious. How is it to go from like being a part of Guest, which is a startup, scale up, all things considered, and then being acquired by this like Airbnb, which is at that point probably a pretty big organization, right? Like, what are the pros? What are the cons? And if there's things so cool.
Getting acquired by a unicorn, because they did have a valuation of in excess of much more than $1 billion at that time, was incredibly exciting. First of all, it was really cool, just the prospect of being able to tell people you work for a company that they know, that you don't have to say, what is Guest? Because I spend so much of my time like, oh, I've never heard of that. Tell me about that. So that was kind of cool. And then obviously just being surrounded by incredibly talented people. I mean, anytime you work for one of these, unicorns or one of these high profile tech companies, they have the advantage of being able to recruit very talented people. So I suffered, probably a lot of my colleagues did as well, from imposter syndrome. It's like, do I really belong here? It's like, just like the head of our data science department. It's like, first of all, what's a data scientist? What the hell is that? So head of our data science program was a former Harvard business professor who didn't want to teach anymore. So he just decided to go join Airbnb and help them figure out their data science program. I was like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah,
that was cool. Okay. It's a big company. I felt like the cool thing is though, is like when we joined, and there's obviously some, not so great bits about it as well. And we can get into those too. But I felt like one of the things that surprised me was like, hey, this company is nearly 10,000 people. I mean, they're just making a ton of money. They have millions of people who come to their website every day and to their app. But if you look behind the scenes, they have some of the same problems that we have in our little startup. And their processes aren't as well oiled and refined as you would expect. And I was like, that was actually a bit comforting to know. And the reason why is because we were very similar to my experience with the alumni department, we were in an incubator phase within Airbnb. So we were a new product that was going to be developed within Airbnb. So we weren't a part of one of the major, value drivers for the organization. We weren't the experiences, we weren't the homes, and that was mainly what the company built most of its revenue on. And we had really good leadership too to kind of provide us with that buffering to give us a runway. So I felt in many ways is like we were still a startup, but just within the overall confines, which were pretty badass confines of Airbnb. I mean, their offices, this was obviously pre-pandemic, a lot's changed since then, but their office spaces was second to none. I mean, just their cafeteria serving 3 amazing meals a day. And this is just each floor in their main building. Just go to Google right now and look at their main building. It's 888 Brandon Street. And just go and look at their office space. Each floor had its like multiple cafeterias, and all the meeting spaces were themed after some of the most famous Airbnb homes. The level of detail. I mean, you walked into that place and you knew instantly you were an Airbnb, or you were part of the Air Fam, as they call it. And that was just everything from the onboarding experience to, everything else afterwards it was an eye opener for me. It's like, this is how great a company can be.
I'm actually looking at it now. It looks amazing. Holy shit. Looks really
It
good.
is. Okay. It is. And I learned so much. It's like, okay, no matter if I stay here forever, if I go on, it's like, I am a sponge. I am going to tell this story. I'm going to copy and steal as much as I possibly can from this. I remember one thing in particular, and that was Brian, our one of the co-founders and CEOs. He talked a lot about customer journey. Customer journey was really important for them. And they talked about what's the 5-star customer journey for Airbnb. And in their early days, because they are Airbnb and they think this is important, they had a Pixar artist come in and actually draw their customer journey for them. Now, first of all, they had somebody from Pixar. Who gets Pixar?
But not quite startup life there, but
cool. Hiring a student from Eastern Europe.
I use stick figures.
Yeah, I was gonna say I could do it on a whiteboard, maybe.
Exactly. And it was really cool because I saw this very aspirational, because obviously the 5-star experience was absurd. Nobody could live up to that, but it was a really good way of communicating around through the entire organization. And mind you, they had, like, I think I may have said this already, but nearly 10,000 people. And how do you get 10,000 people on board with one idea? And the cool thing was that Brian had a background as a designer. So he was very focused on the visual and on how that you could tell a story. And the good thing is that we've done something very similar in my company now, Spree, is where we established our customer journey. And I happen to have a really good illustrator on our team. So we actually illustrated the story and did a voiceover. And I think that's a really good way of bringing your entire organization together and trying to avoid these silos between, for example, marketing and sales and success, to show that story about how everything you do helps connect the dots. And then we're all working together to deliver what we call like a 5-star customer experience. So yeah, I've actually
never done that. Have you done that, Jen? Like, have you ever visualized your journey in that way? Like,
I've done like the customer journey from all the different channels, right? So it's like you first hear about us here, and then you go here, and that was it was an interesting exercise for us, because it almost felt like, dumping a bike in a bucket to see where the holes are, right? We would go through, we're like, this is where customers drop off. This is unnecessary. This is, extra hurdles that maybe we need because of our org chart, but it's actually more hoops for the customer, the prospect to jump through. And so it's a really important exercise. And I would definitely, we didn't do the 5-star. I think that's a really good idea of kind of doing what would be the ideal, what's the shitty one? How do we make sure we stay in the middle? But I think it's a super important exercise, and it's kind of comforting to hear that a 10,000 plus person organization, minus the Pixar person, of course, but that idea of the customer journey is still, it's not just something us young kids and startups do. It's huge multinational companies still do it too.
Yeah, and it's a really good way of bringing the entire organization together. What we've taken it one step further in Spree is actually we have a customer journey health scorecard. So each stage of that journey is broken into certain phases, and we have KPIs associated with each. And then we in a management team are able to use this to figure, okay, great. Maybe we're only doing a 2-star experience here. Maybe we're doing really good here, but here we're not. So you're able to see, for example, like you said, Jennifer, where are the holes in your journey? That's really helpful for us because we wanted to be more than just a story. We wanted to use it from a strategic perspective. And it's a really good conversation tool for us in management to understand where we're doing really well and where we need to improve.
I'd love to ask a question because you talk a little bit about comforting to see that these big companies do have the same problems that we have. I was also part of a company that was acquired, and while there was like really cool bits, awesome offices, and new exciting adventures we could go on, there was also some not so great bits. Could you maybe share with us some of your experiences that you're allowed to share,
Sure.
the not so great bits that maybe you experienced as well?
Yeah, and there were several. I think to start with, the sleepless nights, not knowing if you still had a job.
Yeah. Especially I think from a marketing function, right? I like to think that we're super crucial, but maybe we're not always that crucial when we're getting absorbed by someone else.
Yeah, fortunately for us, we were not just a tech acquisition. We were a tech and talent acquisition.
Nice.
And I think that's really important because they understood that we had not only created this amazing technology, that we were also experts within the creative meeting room space. And this was something that Airbnb was really focused on because they could see that this being another growth opportunity for them. I think they had recently just introduced Airbnb event spaces, which has gone on to become a huge business activity for them. Now, let me just say one thing. The week that we actually got onboarded and the announcement was made, we were one of several companies that week who were there for the onboarding. So Airbnb was in a very aggressive acquisition phase.
That week.
Just that week. I remember going to the all hands and it was like, welcome this company and these people who just got acquired this week. And I'm like, okay, I thought we were a big deal, but we're actually just one of many.
Yeah.
So not really knowing how important of a role you're going to play. I felt like, I guess I could talk about this now because it's been so long ago, but when the core team came over to actually meet us, because obviously there's a whole bunch of due diligence that has to take place before it's the deal is sealed. So they say, I remember when they came over, I was equally excited, but also shitting myself because I'm like, I want to make a good impression, but I don't want to come across as being, like overly nice. And they're like, oh yeah, you're Corey, you're the American. I was like, yes. And I'm from the South, so I still say sir. And then I'm like, why am I saying sir? It's like, what's wrong with you? I remember
James, don't do that.
I remember the first time I met Brian, I'm in a meeting and I'm like, great to meet you, sir. And he looks at me like, did you just say sir? And I was like, oh fuck, I
do the same thing though. I still say sir, or I'll say ma'am. I'll say ma'am sometimes, and people think I'm taking a piss, but yeah, I still say sir. I definitely say sir. Don't say ma'am as often, but it still kind of comes out like yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
My parents, it's just a Southern thing. We do it more. It's a hospitality thing. But anyway,
politeness. I was always raised that way. Polite.
Yeah, right?
Be polite.
But I felt when they were there, it's like I felt kind of like I was on audition, and that was terrifying. Even though I'd kind of like helped build this business and get us to where we were, so I was the one making us super attractive. I felt like I was on audition. Anyway, it went well. That was a tricky part, but also just kind of fearing like once you had become a part of it, am I a short-term talent hire? Are they going to squeeze me? Speaking of the sponge. And then just be off with me? Am I going to become obsolete? So that was, that was kind of nerve-wracking. But also going from being, I was the CMO, I was the big fish in a really small pond, and here I am. I'm just one of many. The marketing team was really big, and again, I'm surrounded by people who are far smarter and much more successful than I was. But you learn, like anything else, you learn to navigate, you learn to adapt, and that's what I did. It was also kind of struggling working across cultures, and that was not as easy as you would think. Even for me, having been removed from the United States for so many years, I found it quite challenging because American culture versus Danish culture, that's painting with too broad strokes, right? Because their culture was also very San Fran culture, big, the whole tech culture.
Which is also different. Like that's,
Yeah.
I think that's a classic example of saying like, I actually remember, I think I've told this story before, but I remember I traveled in India once, and I was in New Delhi, and then I met this woman, and then she said to me, and we were out drinking, and she's like, and then for some reason I was saying something about India as a whole, and she's like, dude, like there's 6,000 kilometers to Mumbai. That's going to Italy and back again, right? It's the same distance. You're not the same as Italians, Casper. And I think it's the same with the States, right? Like, yes, it's a little bit more uniform, but there's still a lot of difference between San Fran and being from, let's say, New York or whatever. Yeah.
I felt like it was a bubble, for better or worse. It was, just learning the vernacular was something new for us. It's like, okay, this is how they talk. And I don't know if you guys have ever read the book, The Circle. If you haven't, I think it's called a guy named Dave Edgar's. It's an amazing book, and it's really kind of a parody of everything that San Fran and tech bro-ish and stuff like that. Just imagine a not so distant future where Google basically owns everything. That's The Circle. But I was like, okay, you have to really just adapt to the way that you talk, and how do you give feedback, and all these things became a bit, I wouldn't say challenging for us. We just had to adapt to it. One of the hard part was like, how do you kind of relinquish control of your baby? It's like, you created this thing. Now you know that you're trying to work on this together, but the power balance is never going to be balanced. They acquired us. They ended up having they took on the team lead role. So I wouldn't say there was a power struggle by any means, but they basically bought us. They bought our technology. They had full ownership of it. Our say-so wasn't on equal terms, and it's never going to be, right, when you're acquired. But also you were like, you suddenly became protective of your baby, right? You're like, oh, okay. Tell me more about that. And then I think the last thing was like traveling a lot. So that's both good and bad. Like in 2019, I traveled more than 100 days for work. And that was wild.
Did you have kids at that time, or?
Yeah, so my kids were, it was 11, so 8 and 11. And it was crazy exciting because spent tons of time in San Francisco. Became very familiar with the Copenhagen San Francisco route with SAS, but also our team was kind of around the world. So I spent a lot of time in London, in Paris, and New York as well. That was really exciting. You didn't really think, because before your startup, you're cost conscious about every little thing, and here it's like, okay, let's just do it. Let's just make it happen. I found that to be quite refreshing, that it was all about just get it done. You're on a really tight timeline here. But looking back on this, man, I've learned so much, and I'm a much better person, a much stronger leader, and definitely a more well-rounded CMO today because of that experience. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
That makes so much sense. And I think on that note, we'll round this one off, this episode, and then I think we'll in the next episode we'll deep dive a bit on more marketing focused things, because it's been super interesting about your journey here.
Quite a cool journey, really cool journey.
And I was just going to say, if anybody wants to know any more about this, then feel free to reach out. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd be more than happy to share more.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. And then we'll be right back in a week for people. Yeah.
We'll see everyone else in a week, Corey. We'll see you in 3 seconds.
We'll see you in a second.
Bye.